Hello and welcome to Morningstar Journal News. My name is Daniel Emmanuel, and today we're going to be having a special guest, Sean Malone. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And he is the director for CRI, Crisis Relief International, and he's going to be the future director for SF for Morningstar University. So, Sean, what can you tell us about CRI? What do you do in there, and what do you all as an organization do?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be on with you. And so CRI, Crisis Response International, we are a disaster relief crisis response ministry. We train church people who want to go in times of crisis and disaster and bring the kingdom in the midst of it. And what we've seen in all the places that we've been around the world is God does incredible things in the midst of great darkness. And so we train people, we equip them for unusual circumstances, situations that you might not readily be in everyday life, how to respond to a hurricane, a tornado, earthquake, war situations, terrorism, political upheaval, these sorts of things. And our heart is to reach the harvest in the midst of crisis. And obviously, if you've looked at the news anytime soon, our world is in crisis, but in the midst of that, there's going to be a great harvest. So that's our heart.
Amen. That's amazing. So I was going to ask you, why do you do that, or how did it start, all this? Did you start it?
Yeah, it wasn't on purpose, I'll tell you that. It was quite on accident.
Like every calling of God, basically.
Yeah. Kind of stumbled into it. I don't know if anybody would choose this specifically. Maybe they would, but I didn't. I was in the major motion picture business in New York City, but I was an intercessor. And I was spending my lunch breaks praying on top of different building tops around New York. And it's just a season of intimacy with the Lord and praying, interceding. And I just had this sense that something terrible was coming to my city. And I would go up on top of different building tops. We were working on a movie with Kevin Kline. I think it was called The Emperor's Club at the time. And I would just groan and weep many times with my arms lifted up over lower Manhattan. And a couple months later, I actually asked the Lord the question. I said, Lord, are buildings about to come down in Manhattan? I took a long trip around the United States, came back, and what happened is 2 days later, the towers came down. And so we got thrown into that unexpectedly. We got a call from the mayor's office because we do lighting. If you remember 9/11, after the towers came down, the firemen were digging with 99-cent flashlights. And I remember looking at my dad, and I said, Dad, we light up New York City like daytime all the time. Let's go in and help out. And so that's what we ended up doing. We ended up down there at 9/11. That's kind of how I got thrown into that situation. So we did all the emergency lighting and whatnot. And then a couple of years later, I went to work for Paramount Pictures down in New Orleans. And I was fighting the Lord on that because he had asked me, would you be willing to move to New Orleans? And I fought him. And so I finally yielded. And as soon as I did, my boss came up to me at Paramount Pictures and he said, would you move to New Orleans to go open up a movie studio? And I knew it wasn't about the job. We got down there, and 5 days later, Hurricane Katrina hit. And so here I was, moved to New York, and then, went on a trip, came back 2 days later, 9/11 happened, moved to New Orleans. 5 days later, Hurricane Katrina had happened. And I began to realize that God wants us in the midst of those situations, particularly me in that situation, but he wants us as the body of Christ. And our heart has been over the years, like the prophet Agabus, in Acts chapter 11, that, by the word of the Lord, he said to the elders that a famine was coming. It says that they then determined to send relief. And I always thought that was profound. And so we've seen this mark over the years to where we're positioned in the right place, or the Lord will say this weekend, and we'll be ready because the tornado was coming. And many times we've been in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right time, however you want to say that. But it was really down in Hurricane Katrina where we saw an outbreak of the power of God in an unprecedented way. And what I mean by that, God showed up in our building in a 10-foot cloud, and signs, wonders, and miracles broke out for the next 9 months. Literally what I'm saying is everyone you touched, I would rate it at maybe 90% got healed. And
Wow.
I was ruined for missions or evangelism, any other way. I'm like, I want to go where people are hungry. And so I've committed my life to this. So we've been going full time. We officially started the organization in 2007 in the belly of the prayer movement, and night and day worship, prayer, intercession, understanding the end times. But I want to say this publicly, really important. Before we even started, I came to my first disaster relief training here at Morningstar. So it's funny how the Lord brought me back here, and I don't know, maybe I'm paying a debt back by coming and taking on Special Forces. I don't know, but I'm excited to be here, and
Wow.
it's just
It's amazing to hear your story. And where is your organization, like the headquarters?
Yeah, so we're headquartered just up the road, about 3 hours, 33 minutes from this building in Blue Ridge, Virginia. So it's about 20 minutes north of Roanoke. We're in the Blue Ridge Mountains, absolutely beautiful, 85-acre campus, 21 structures. We have full-time staff living there, and we have all of our relief equipment there, our mobile kitchens and disaster relief trailers and our warehousing. So,
Nice.
yeah, we do all of our training there as well.
So what is the process like when you get to a disaster place or a crisis, a situation of crisis? What is the process you normally do as an organization? How do you assess the problem, and how do you determine which resources are going to go where
Sure.
there's so much need?
Yeah, the process, it's not always the same every time because every disaster is different, but hopefully the Lord's already speaking to us about it. And so we're already at orange alert, knowing that, hey, something's coming. So usually our team has some sort of sense, or somebody's had a dream that something's coming. We're leaning into it. That's usually the most ideal. Sometimes we lean into it, but there is always some aspect of God sending us. And you always want to be sent, And what I mean by that is we begin to lean into it, and then what we do is we look for our man of peace on the ground. Somebody who, it could be a pastor, it could be a mayor, it could be emergency management. It could be any of those, but really somebody who's going to welcome us, celebrate us, open the doors that we need to be able to set up relief operations, set up a point of distribution, take over a warehouse and start doing relief operations out of that. It's just one of those things, after doing this for 15 years, all the signs and the feelings that you have and the indications that God is on this, He's saying to go, and those doors and the favor just comes, and the people and the resources begin to show up.
Wow. And so how do you select volunteers, or how is the process for people that want to volunteer?
Yeah, so we don't personally select volunteers. Volunteers have to elect themselves. And so what I mean by that is, people who have a heart to run into situations like this, to help, to mobilize their compassion when people really need it the most. We require them to go through a training, and the training, obviously people have all sorts of skill sets. Maybe they're a nurse, or maybe they're a first responder, or been in the military. That's all great, but there's certain ways that we do things, certain ways that we operate on the ground, and for their protection and the protection of the people we're serving, they have to go through our training. There's two main ways they can do that. They can go online and get trained in about 10 hours. They can work at their own pace by doing that. If they're in a rush to get out on a deployment, that's a great way to get trained. But if you can, what you really want to do is you want to come to one of our boot camp trainings up in Virginia. And this is a 5-day event. You go through all sorts of simulations, all sorts of hands-on training. World-class trainers come in from all different places, and it's a really epic experience for the individual. We see the level of responder that we get from people who go through that is quite different than people really miss something, taking something online. But it still works, gets people in the field, and they'll catch the culture and how we do things, more precisely out there. But those are the two main ways. But we got a big boot camp coming up in June, and so anyway.
Just saying.
And actually, we got a discount for Morningstar people if you sign up and put in MS in the coupon code. I believe it's about $150 off, because we just want Morningstar people to go get trained.
There you go.
Actually, Rick wants Morningstar people to get trained. He said, well, how do we get our people trained? So there you go. There's your plug.
So I have another question. Are you right now present in Ukraine? And
We are.
What are, like, how is the team going? What can you share with us about the situation?
Yeah,
on the ground?
absolutely. So we've been on the ground since the very beginning of this thing, probably the first week or two when the conflict broke out. We never thought that we weren't going. And the reason why I say that is probably about 3 weeks before the conflict broke out, whatever you want to call it, we were talking as a team, and I was just feeling, you know what, we need to begin to train people on how to go into war zones and high-intensity environments. I was just feeling it in the spirit. Little did I know that Ukraine was coming and the Russians attacking and whatnot. So, so we've been on the ground. We've sent about 120 trained cry responders over. We send them in what we call waves. Those are basically, it's another word for a team. And those teams are usually anywhere from like 10 to 20 people. And we started off at the Polish border in Medyka, and then we moved down further south, close to the Slovakia border. Because initially what was happening is all the men were staying and fighting, and all the women and children were fleeing west. Those who had documentation could actually flee the country, go into Poland. Everybody wanted to go into Poland because it's the more westernized, city there, Krakow. And so, but anyway, then we moved to a place called Stry, which is just south of Lviv. Lviv is on the news quite often. Just getting further into the need because the refugees stopped coming. What we learned then is the people who didn't have the paperwork to leave were stopping, but they were stopping in western Ukraine. Maybe they were waiting to see which way it would go, or they didn't have documentation or the finances to go. So then we started ministering there. We're doing medical clinics, working in orphanages, coming alongside of other ministries and strengthening them. And then we've moved to Kyiv. And so we're in the Kyiv region right now and doing splinter operations in a couple of other cities, further east from there, and then closer to the conflict zone down in the south. And that looks like, running stuff like combat, medical kits to the front lines and, doing medical clinics, assisting people with grief. I mean, what's happening is, people are losing loved ones. Not only do they lose their jobs, their homes, there's no entertainment, there's no food in the grocery stores. There's, now there's gas shortages, there's no diesel. The situation's really escalated. So we're just coming alongside of people any way that we can. We're bringing out, 300 to 600 bags of groceries a day out into villages. And what we're finding in Kyiv and in that surrounding area is that it's mostly elderly and handicapped that got left behind. And so that's the primary demographic of people that we're serving right now. I mean, we're serving people whose homes got taken over by the Russians. They're living in the garage with no electricity, no running water. And then finally, obviously, Russia evacuated. They lost the Battle of Kyiv, at least for now. And so we're serving primarily that population, the elderly and disabled.
Do you have any people on eastern Ukraine or just on Kyiv and western Ukraine?
Yeah, we're in Kyiv, and then, like I said, we're doing splinter operations. What we call special ops.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a couple hours east and a couple hours south. Closer to the
relief.
conflict zones. But yeah, and that's mostly running aid and supplies to soldiers and to the front lines. We have the opinion, and it may be a little controversial. We did this in northern Iraq with the ISIS crisis. If we could stop the bleeding and support the guys who could actually stop the war, then it'll stop a lot of the suffering as well. And so, I think we've gotten about $100,000 in combat medical kits to the front lines and morale kits and different supplies to the soldiers as well. But
yeah, you're basically you're not supporting a side. You're supporting the suffering and the
exactly
people.
Yeah, and we know there's a lot of politics, and people contact me, well, these are the bad guys and these are the good guys. I'm like, we don't care about any of that. People are suffering, people are dying, people's homes are being destroyed. The teams are finding the bodies, that have been executed, all of that. We see all of that. That doesn't matter, the politics in it to us. The fact that there's human suffering in the midst of this, and it's an opportunity to show God's love. And so we meet the basic needs so we can meet the more urgent spiritual needs. We're seeing people get saved, delivered,
Wow.
people getting set free of trauma, people getting set free of addictions. So it's such a crisis in general. It doesn't matter whether it's Ukraine or wherever. When people are in crisis, you know this in your own life, your prayer life goes from a 1 to a 10, overnight. It's the time for the gospel to shine in the midst of darkness. So,
and do you have any story, like a specific story that you could share of somebody or someone that was changed, that was impacted?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just referencing that one babushka, the grandma, who had been living in her garage while the Russians were living in her house. We were able to come alongside of her and minister to her and meet some basic needs and just love on her, share the love of God. She said she's never felt the love of God like that before in her life, which is pretty powerful. There was another woman, she was in her 20s. She was a nanny in an orphanage. And early on, when Kyiv came under attack, they were able to, get the kids out into another country. But while she was doing that, her husband was fighting, and her husband was killed. And so we were able to come alongside of her. Her name was Diana. And we were able to come alongside Diana, and our female responders were able to minister to her and just share the love of God. And again, she said the same thing. I've never felt the love of God and the peace of God. She was in the midst of like Orthodox mourning and pretty traumatized by it. But, in a situation like this, I just truly believe that we all have something to offer. We have the Holy Spirit living inside of us. And in moments like this, when we just say yes, it's really not about our talent and our skills. It's about our willingness to be used by the Lord. The Bible's full of stories of God using weak people to do incredible things, and that's what we're seeing in Ukraine for people who are saying yes and going.
Amen. And what do you can say about the response of the government to crisis? Is it good? How they assess the crisis in comparison to other organizations? Like, are they good doing what? Like crisis relief?
Well, I think it depends in terms of what administration. That varies. I know during Hurricane Katrina, under the Bush administration, they started the faith-based initiatives. And because in Katrina, it was such a wide-scale event with so many systemic problems and issues that it was too big for the government to handle. And I remember in that moment, the government realized, like, hey, we can bring in resources, we could bring in the National Guard, but we can't be the hands and the heart to these people in the way that they need to really bring them comfort. Like they could bring in some services. And so they really reached out to the church. It was a real turning point in disaster relief, Hurricane Katrina. I think for many ministries, I think a lot of churches were awakened to the reality. Many churches went down there. I know Morningstar was there and experienced incredible things. But under George Bush, they started the faith-based initiatives, and that was where the government really welcomed the church, because before that, it was like, no, church people stay away. But during Katrina, when they were overwhelmed, they're like, no, church people, we need you. And I think it was the church that really got the job done during Katrina. That's who got the work done.
Wow. So is the government partnering with churches when it works the best, basically?
When that can happen, I think sometimes that can be good. Typically what we'll try and do is we'll try and do that on a local level. Sometimes we find in specific events that there's too many layers of bureaucracy and too many layers of, containers of resources, and this needs approval and that needs approval. Kind of the way that we've operated is we kind of get around that yellow tape and we just try and find the populations of people who aren't getting the help, and where the news cameras aren't. And so we'll go to like the second or third hardest hit area where there isn't all that bureaucracy. And because we just want to help people. We just want to move resources. We want to be open hands and an open pipeline. So, but to answer your question, we've partnered with different governments. Again, it's about that man of peace. So we've had men of peace that, were the mayors of cities. And it's been amazing. Like when the church works together and you have a godly person in leadership, that's absolutely amazing. I know down in Louisiana on later hurricanes, Hurricane Gustav, and then Hurricane Sandy in New York with one of the local mayors there in Lindenhurst. It was absolutely amazing. They just opened up every single door. And we've seen it in the nations as well. It's not always or every deployment, but it's amazing when it comes together and you're backed by the government,
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So how can our viewers see more of what you do and share it or support it or even volunteer if they want?
Yeah, absolutely. They go to our website, criout.com, and we're on Facebook. We're on all the social media channels, and you can check out our videos there. And if God prompts you to deploy to Ukraine, we need people on the ground. So, you could take the training online, or really, again, the best way to get involved, come to the boot camp in June. That's going to be out of sight. So,
okay. Oh, I forgot one last question.
Yeah.
So, what are you planning to do with SF? With
SF, I knew the question was coming.
Morningstar University and SF.
I'm so excited about this, and I have to be honest with you, like this wasn't something I was thinking about doing. But back in, I think it was maybe like 2006, 2007, I would see SF come up from time to time, and I was like, ooh, I like that, That looks really exciting. But then 2007, I started Cry, and I've been working full-time with this, and from time to time I would see it, but I never really knew too much about it. And then, had a couple of conversations with Nathan Plowman. I know that he really developed this thing and, took it to an incredible level. And I'm really looking to build on that, take what he's done, and but then also looking, at our current situation. The last 2 years, we're in an unprecedented hour.
We are.
Absolutely. It's like in 2000, we crossed the threshold. And I have been buried in Matthew chapter 24 and Matthew chapter 25. And Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, they're all parallel chapters that Jesus gives the greatest clarity in terms of the crisis of the hour that we're living in. I believe that we're living in that hour. He talks about wars, rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquake, lawlessness, offense. And I sit there and I look, and my heart is, how do we prepare the church to thrive in that hour? I mean, you just look at COVID, and we're still seeing people who, got knocked to the sideline. I'm not even talking about the illness or the financial issues that came with it for people, like losing their jobs, but the information, the disinformation. I mean, I saw it sideline so many people in the midst of just in the fog of war. I believe that we're going to have a victorious end time church, and my heart is just full with giving people confidence. It doesn't matter what job they go into or what avenue of life or what their ministry is. What Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, it's going to affect all of us, no matter where we are. So in terms of SF, what I want to do is I want to build confidence in people. I'm going to give challenges and, experiences and outreaches and deployments and lots of crazy, fun, adventurous stuff that people will gain confidence that no matter what life throws at them, they're going to be able to overcome. But they're also going to be able to reach the harvest, because after Jesus outlines all of those crazy dark things that are going to happen in a generation, he says, when you see these things, you're going to see all of these things, and this generation isn't going to pass away. But what he promises is, he says that the gospel of the kingdom will then go forth into every nation. See, I always heard it that, hey, if we go and we get the last tract out or the last Bible to that lost people group, then poof, Jesus is going to come back. I don't think that's what Jesus was saying in that message. He was saying, hey, guys, it's in this context that the gospel, like, it's going to be good news. And it's not just the good news of salvation, but it's the good news that there's a king and a kingdom coming to planet Earth that's going to make all wrong things right. Amen. And so that's priming the pump, but it's in that hour. And so how do we prepare people to thrive and to reach the great harvest, the billion-soul harvest, in the context of that hour? Because then Matthew 25 goes on to say, and I don't mean to preach here, but I'm so passionate about this, and this is what's driving me, and I believe driving some of the vision of where SF is going to go. But Matthew 25 goes on to say, where Jesus is actually preaching, he's preaching about the virgins, the wise virgins, the man who buries the talent in the ground, and the sheep and the goats. And all of those three parables, he's speaking to believers. And it's all about what we do in that hour of crisis. It's the same message. It's the Olivet Discourse. And so our response, how we treat, the people, the least of them, how we're serving people in that hour. Are we using our talents to its fullest in the hour of crisis?
Amen.
Very important, because our natural tendency is to shrink back and hide and hunker down and, maybe, hide some food and just wait for Jesus to come back. I don't think we're going to get a good report if we do that. So report card, I mean. So I'm passionate about that. So SF, again, this is going to be about instilling confidence in people, really challenging them, helping them discover the greatness that's inside of them, push them to the absolute limits, go on some crazy excursions. We're going to bring them up to the camp, bring them into some training events. We'll do some great mission trips as well. It's going to be absolutely amazing. I encourage people to sign up.
Well, even I want to sign up.
Come on, let's do it.
Okay.
I can't wait for the 0 Dark 30 workouts.
Thank you so much, Sean, for being here, for accepting, for sharing all this with us.
Absolutely.
And thank you for all you do, for being the hands and feet of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you do and getting the word out, getting truth out. We need it.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching and for tuning in. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, on Morningstar Journal News. And you can find us on our webpage, www.morningstarjournal.com. Thank you for watching. Until next time, God bless you and God bless America.